Before we head into Camperdown Zoo, I'll inform you on the history behind zoos, beginning at the 5 freedoms and how they have impacted current welfare legislation. To understand the importance of the 5 freedoms and why they were developed, let's go back to 1964, when a British woman named Ruth Harrison wrote a book named Animal Machines. The book described the suffering of farm animals. The book prompted the British government to appoint a committee to look into the welfare of farm animals. In 1965, the committee, chaired by Professor Roger Bramble, stated that animals should have the freedom to stand up, lie down, turn around, groom themselves, and stretch their limbs. These freedoms became known as Bramble's 5 freedoms. They were then built up over the years to ensure the mental and physical needs of animals in our care are very good standard. They now are the freedom to express normal behaviour, freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, and freedom from fear and distress. They affect today's legislation as the legislation is built up from the years from the 5 freedoms. The 5 freedoms forms the basis of legislation which helps to protect domestic and wild zoo animals. The Zoo Licensing Act 1981 requires the inspection and licensing of all zoos in Great Britain. It states that all zoos require a license to operate. A zoo is defined as any establishment where wild animals are kept for exhibition to which members of the public have access, with or without charge for admission. This has to be open for 7 or more days in any period of 12 consecutive months, excluding circuses and pet shops. It aims to ensure where animals are kept in enclosures, they are provided with a suitable environment in accordance with 5 freedoms. The Bali Directive sets the conditions for transport of non-domestic animals within the EU, which allows for easier movement of animals to different institutions. BIAZA, the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums. This represents the best zoos and aquariums in the UK and Ireland. It publishes advice and guidelines in the form of best practice. It guides for a huge range of species and promotes conservation and education. EAZA, European Association of Zoos and Aquaria. This is the membership organisation that sets standards for zoos and aquariums within Europe and Western Asia. It helps them work towards goals of education, research and conservation. Zookeepers perform a really important role by managing and maintaining the animals and their environment. They play a key role in research, education and conservation. They carry out daily tasks to ensure animals are receiving good animal welfare and the 5 freedoms are being met. A day for a zookeeper can consist of cleaning out enclosures, provision of correct diet and sufficient water, administrating medicine or providing vet care, park maintenance, carrying out health checks and health records, educating the public, and taking part in the breeding programs. Programs they use consist of ZIMS, a zoological information monitoring system, an online system used to keep records of every animal within a collection. They can be used and assessed by zoos and aquariums nationwide. They also use ESB. This is a European stud books. The stud bookkeeper collects all the data on births, deaths, transfers and more from the EAZA zoos and aquariums for that any specific species. This data is then entered into a special computer software program, which then allows the stud bookkeeper to carry out analysis of the population of that species. Good welfare in a zoo includes provision of food and water, which includes the correct diet and amount of food the specific species needs. They also need sheltered areas where the species can hide and escape out of the public view. Correct substrate when the species requires it, and vet care and health checks are very needed as well. Poor welfare in a zoo is inappropriate diet in relation to the species. A lack of food and water and lack of shelter is not good for the animal. The animals need to hide and go out of the view from the public when they need to. Incorrect housing and lack of no veterinary care or health checks is not good. Can you spot this monkey? No. This is the pygmy marmoset. The pygmy marmoset is one of the world's smallest primates, being the smallest true monkey, with a head-body length ranging from 117 to 152 millimeters and a tail of 172 to 229 millimeters. This is one of the pygmy marmoset's favourite snacks, a waxworm. Other nutritional requirements in captivity are veggies and fruit, gum and sap, insects, nectar, and crickets and mealworms. In their natural environment, they get their nutritional requirements from nectar, fruit, leaves, and insects. The insects give them a protein boost. Their primary type of food is gum or tree sap. They mostly stay active during cooler mornings and late afternoon, when the sun isn't too hot for them. Using specially adapted teeth and claws, they rip open parts of the tree. These animals possess claw-shaped nails known as tegulae. The sharp lower canine teeth allow these monkeys to pierce tree bark in order to get the desired sap. This is their favourite type of food. In captivity, zookeepers tend to scatter feed fruit and veggies. They place food on platforms so they can jump and climb. This is to allow for the pygmy marmosets to climb and scavenge as they would in the wild. To mimic their favourite food, the gum from trees, zookeepers from Camperdown have placed in their enclosure a hanging log. This is filled with tree sap, which gives them plenty of enrichment. The pygmy marmosets will use their claws and teeth to work for the gum as they would in the wild. Sometimes in zoos, animals can show uncharacteristic behaviours. For example, when a captive carnivore, like a lynx, may have uncharacteristic behaviours when they do not have enough mental and physical stimulation. Without opportunities for hunting and exploring, they may become lazy and less active, which could lead to stress and boredom and maybe being overweight. In captivity, herbivores, like lemurs, are social animals and thrive in social groups. When kept in captivity without proper socialisation, they may display head bobbing or swaying, which comes from a lack of social interaction. This has led to stress. When animals are kept in captivity, they can sometimes exhibit uncharacteristic behaviours. This can be due to stress, boredom, or a lack of appropriate stimulation. Some examples include pacing, self-harm, aggression, or repetitive behaviours. Zoos need to provide appropriate environmental enrichment, socialisation, and space for these animals to engage in natural behaviours. Hand-rearing animals can cause uncharacteristic behaviours for captive animals as well. Hand-rearing can have an impact as when the animals are raised by humans from a young age, this could lead to a dependency on humans. This can make it more difficult for them to reintegrate into their natural habitat or interact with their own species. The behaviour and welfare of the pygmy marmosets. For the pygmy marmosets, we wanted to record their behaviours by using ethograms. Ethograms are a tool used to document animals' behaviours by observing and recording. Every 5 minutes during a 45-minute period, I recorded what I saw the pygmy marmosets doing at that time. The findings of the ethogram showed that the pygmy marmosets are showing natural behaviours. They spend a lot of the time together cuddling and grooming. Then a few times they were seen climbing and only jumped once. On another ethogram at a different time, they were seen mostly eating. This may have been because the time of the day was when they get fed, so this made a difference to the other ethogram, which was taken earlier on in the day. This is the Pygmy marmoset enclosure. I investigated the current welfare of the Pygmy marmosets and created a welfare sheet to evaluate the welfare of the enclosure for the Pygmy marmosets. It was shown inside and outside with some feeding tools, including a wooden block with gum sap, perches with food placed on them to let them hunt, and little feeding bowls. They are also given a water bowl with fresh water daily. Their feeding routine is from 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. The keepers encourage natural feeding habits with the wooden block with the gum sap to mimic gum from a tree which Pygmy marmosets would eat in the wild. They also mimic natural diets with the fruit and veg, which would be as close to what they eat, and bugs as what they would find in the wild. I looked at the sensory enrichment and noticed they have brush heads textures for them to play with, which is touch, food around the enclosure for them to find, which is smell, sap in the wooden block and along the branches, which is taste, and their visual is with a busy enclosure filled with many stimulating things, and outside is very much like their natural environment. They also hear all the other animals around them and the insects for them to find, like crickets. I also looked at the environmental welfare side. It was shown that they have substrate, which is indoors. They have hay and sawdust. Their shelters are indoor area plus wooden nest boxes outside and inside. They have perching areas which are shelves outside for them to jump to, and inside they also have ledges. They have hiding areas which are coconuts hanging from the top and hanging bedding and nest boxes. Their catching and holding areas are when they close off the outside area with them being inside. The vegetation in their enclosure is trees, bamboo and hay. They mimic natural environment by having outside area filled with bamboo and trees to mimic a forest. They have a wooden log with tree sap to mimic a tree they would get gum from. And them being together is to mimic living in a group. Enrichment is important for captive animals because it helps stimulate their natural behaviours. In a group, we had planned to create an enrichment that involved food for the Pygmy marmosets. We firstly created a mind map to see what sorts of enrichment would be best for the Pygmy marmosets. We decided that they already had hiding areas and not enough ways to involve food, so this is how we came to our decision. We were hoping to have a more creative feeding area where they can use their sense of smell to find the food. This is us building our enrichment. By putting the tubes on the bamboo blinds, which will hopefully let the Pygmy marmosets try and hunt for their food using their natural abilities. By putting food in each tube, it allows them to try and find it. When we put the enrichment in, we completed another ethogram to compare to the previous before the enrichment. It showed that the marmosets climbed more outside and seemed to take interest for the first 5 minutes, then went back to grooming each other, so not much has changed from the first ethogram. The enrichment went well, in the fact that it brought the pygmies out into the outside, which I had not seen them do much before. It was shown later by placing a trail cam into the closure that pygmies did in fact like the enrichment, and it used it quite often when no one was looking. It shows them using different strategies of using different items in the enclosure to balance on and get the food also.